If Abraham never existed, then Moses could not have existed as a historical figure. And if Moses couldn't have existed, then the Bible doesn't merely lose credibility, it loses structural coherence. That's not theology, it's dependency logic. Today, we're going to test Abraham using the same historical methods skeptics already used to partially tolerate Moses. And what we'll find is that Abraham doesn't just survive those tests, he outperforms Moses. Almost every modern debate fixates on Moses, Exodus, Pharaoh, miracles. But Moses is not the foundation of the biblical system. He's actually downstream. Moses presupposes a people, a lineage, a land promise, and an ancestral identity. None of that originates with Moses, it originates with Abraham. Which means if Abraham collapses, Moses doesn't merely become unlikely, he becomes conceptually impossible. So, we're going to run a controlled test. Same rules, same skepticism, same burden of proof. If Moses is considered plausible because the Pentateuch behaves like ancient historiography, its books mutually anchor one another, and removing Moses causes narrative collapse, then we're obligated to ask, do those same criteria apply to Abraham? Because if they do, and they work better, then dismissing Abraham is not skepticism, it's special pleading. Let's strip away archaeology, tradition, and theology for a moment. Just the text. Abraham's narrative spans roughly 14 chapters of Genesis. Not poetry, not mythic cycles, but grounded prose narrative. What does the text emphasize? Genealogies, locations, negotiations, failures, delays, disappointments. Abraham never founds a city, never rules a kingdom, never conquers a territory, and never sees the promise fulfilled. That's anti-propaganda. Invented founders are optimized. Abraham is constrained. Myths behave a certain way. They inflate, they simplify, they glorify. Abraham does none of this. He lies out of fear. He doubts. He negotiates awkwardly. He allows others to choose land before him. He dies quietly. This is exactly what remembered ancestral figures look like, not what invented cultural heroes look like. Now here's where Abraham decisively separates from Moses. If Moses existed as described, mass migration, state conflict, national trauma, we would expect some external trace. But Abraham? A nomadic, non-royal, pastoral patriarch. For Abraham, silence is expected. Demanding inscriptions for Abraham is like demanding tax records for a shepherd. That's not skepticism, that's a category error. Now we reach the hard constraint. Moses is genealogically embedded, son of Levi, representative of Israel, but Israel only exists because of Abraham. You can argue Abraham existed, Moses didn't. That's logically coherent. You cannot argue Moses existed, Abraham didn't, without inventing an entirely new origin for Israel, one that leaves no competing traditions behind. That is an enormous reconstruction cost. In historical modeling, high-cost reconstructions are disfavored. There's another factor that skeptics almost never weight properly. Abraham is preserved independently by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These civilizations split, competed, disagreed, yet none discarded Abraham. Islam in particular had every incentive to replace him, and instead elevated him. That is not how disposable myths behave. So let's quantify this. Start skeptical. Say there's only a 30% chance Abraham ever existed. Now update. Human scale narrative. Probability increases. Lack of myth optimization increases. Expected silence. Neutral to positive. Structural dependency. Major increase. 3 independent traditions. Increase. Moses depends on Abraham. Doubling effect. When you actually run those updates conservatively, Abraham lands to around 80 to 90% likely. Even if you start at 10%, Abraham still crosses 50%. That's not proof, but it is statistical favorability. Moses remains plausible, but he carries higher evidentiary expectations, larger scale claims, greater silence liability. Abraham doesn't. Using the same methods, Abraham consistently scores higher, which leaves us with an uncomfortable conclusion. If Moses is even moderately plausible, Abraham becomes difficult to dismiss. And if Abraham stands, the foundation of the biblical narrative stands with him. That's why Abraham, not Moses, is the real pressure point.